then on the faces of it, no amount of evidence could persuade you of a miraculous claim. You've kind of decided that before you come to the text.
What you'd have to do is you'd have to have evidence from physicists that these laws don't apply.
Okay, so you'd have to go to the physicist rather than
you
the historian.
You certainly could prove it, because physicists...
So we need to go to the physicist for the evidence.
Here is a historian who, when asked about what is going to convince you, he, rather than saying that this historical evidence will convince me, he says, I'm going to appeal outside of history to the domain of science, to physics, because that is his primary reason that he rejects the resurrection. It is not historical evidence.
And the resurrection of Jesus did indeed happen, and we do have enough historical evidences to back it up. Going to physicist and historian, a professional historian, a really reputable historian, saying that, I can't answer this question, I'll have to go to the physicist, is just lazy.
Hello and welcome to Apologetics Adda. This is that corner where we have casual conversations on faith, apologetics, and more. Today I'm joined with Ashish. Ashish, I think this is the first time we are on the frame together.
Yeah, this is the first time.
I think on Zoom we did a conversation responding to Pranav Radhakrishnan.
Right.
But this is the first time we are actually sitting together in a video, long time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what are we tackling today?
So, I was actually watching this debate by Justin Bass, Bart Ehrman. Have you watched it?
Of course, quite a fiery, intense debate. Absolutely. Right time of the year, Easter.
I think this was one of the rare debates that I watched in one sitting.
Absolutely.
First of all, it was short, and then the conversation was so intense and fiery.
Not keeping a clock, right? It was a free-flowing conversation.
Yeah.
Both of them were very passionate and fierce about what they were defending.
Absolutely.
And I think Bart Ehrman from the atheist camp, I would say, is one of my favorite when it comes to the rhetoric.
I love listening to him.
Rhetoric and the convincing way in which he speaks. Although caveat to be stated, sometimes very deceptive in the way he responds and the kind of
and actually we are going to look at a deceptive part in the debate where he actually brings in physics. I was astonished when he brought in physics, and it intrigued. I mean, it's intriguing in the part of the debate where and I thought, wow, this is going to be interesting.
What has physics to do with matters of history?
Sort of, but we know, when we're talking about resurrection, I mean, we assume that we're not talking about physics, of course, but then Ehrman brings physics, though. Well, let's have a look at the clip and.
Sure.
Why don't I think a person got raised from the dead?
Yes.
Oh.
Why don't you think Jesus got raised from the dead?
I don't think anybody gets raised from the dead.
Okay.
Because it violates the laws of nature.
Okay.
I mean,
so you have the kind of a materialist, fundamentalist view.
Well, let me ask this. You think God raised Jesus
life,
from the dead, right? Do you think God can break the laws of mathematics? Can God
can't contradict himself, no. Because he is...
Exactly.
Mathematics is his language.
That's right. The other language he uses is physics. Can he break the laws of physics?
I mean, I think we're getting off.
No, we are not getting off. This is precisely... You asked me why I don't believe it. And the reason I don't believe it is because it violates the laws of physics.
And I don't think God... He can feed things into his system, for sure.
I don't think God can break the law of physics any more than he can break the law of mathematics.
Feeding things into his system to bring a dead person to life is not the same thing as making 2 + 2 5. That's completely different things.
They are both laws that have never been broken in history.
Except in the case of Jesus, right?
So here's the question. This is it's a very big question, because what you're arguing is that the most probable event that happens with Jesus, because Paul and Peter said it happened, the most probable thing is the violation of a law of physics that has never been violated in 13.8 billion years. Never. Except in this one instance. Now, if you're a historian, historians don't argue that something that happened only once in all of history is the most probable occurrence because somebody said it happened.
Unless there's an incredible evidence.
The incredible evidence is that Paul said so?
Not just that. We're just getting started.
What's interesting here for me, Bart, though, is that presumably, on the face of it, if you do believe that God would never, if there is a God, let's say, that God would never break the laws of physics, then on the faces of it, no amount of evidence could persuade you of a miraculous claim. You've kind of decided that before you come to the text.
What you'd have to do is you'd have to have evidence from physicists that these laws don't apply.
Okay, so you'd have to go to the physicist rather than the historian.
You certainly could prove it, because physicists...
So we need to go to the physicist for the evidence.
Well, if you're going to say that the laws of physics have been broken one time in the history of the human race, then you need pretty good evidence. And the evidence that somebody said they saw somebody.
But that's not the only evidence, and we're going to talk about more. But that's not the only evidence. We were talking about the appearances, and the appearances, I think...
Okay, so it's the realm of physics from what I hear. Bart Ehrman saying this, he brings in the concept of physical laws.
And he brings in the concept of mathematical laws.
And he kind of argues that this has never happened in all of history of the universe, and therefore it is impossible. He kind of uses the word probable as well. We'll get there.
So initially he starts with mathematics and physics, right?
Yeah.
And he says that God uses the language of math, and Justin rightly says, of course, because God cannot break mathematical laws because it's in the nature of God. It's reflection of God's own character. And then Ehrman says, well, God cannot break physical laws because he uses that as a language. But I don't buy into that comparison, because mathematical laws are fundamental. They don't change. There could be a universe with a different set of physical laws, but mathematics would still be the same. I mean, not the way that we represent mathematics, but the foundational mathematical truths would not change. But we could have had a universe with a different set of physical laws, right? Because physical laws are contingent and they are grounded in space-time. If there is no space-time, there is no physical laws. But that's not true with mathematical laws, right? So as I was reading through the comments, I could see a lot of people bringing up this point. And this is very clear. I don't know why Ehrman brings up this. And Bass kind of responds to it. Initially, I think Bass could have pushed it a more and, to kind of corner Ehrman.
I mean, same thoughts here as well. But see, the laws of physics are induced from what we observe.
Absolutely.
I think he's assuming a sort of omniscience here when he says that it has never happened. How can you make a statement like that? Because in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a big paradigm shift in the laws of physics itself.
Yeah, so you have to then explain what are these physics and physical laws and natural laws that you're talking about, because then you'll have to talk about the metaphysics of them, right?
Yeah.
What they actually are, because we know that the laws of physics actually break in certain places of the universe. Maybe if you're talking about black hole and singularity, these are places where the known laws of physics would break down. Or, as you said, the turn of the 20th century, we were looking at these instances where the known laws of physics were being broken down. So then what do you mean by these physical laws? And there are instances where the laws of physics are broken, and then we revise our laws, right? So that statement that laws of physics cannot be broken or cannot be violated is tricky, because then you will have to actually talk about what exactly you mean by natural laws or physical laws. And on top of that, you could have instances like if a phone drops from my hand, if this phone is about to drop and you catch it, you did not break the law of gravity, right? So then that's a question. What are
the laws of
physics and how do you define it? Yeah.
So interesting. So what Bart Ehrman does here is that he begins with the presupposition that miracles are somewhat violations of scientific laws, and he's bringing the physical sciences into it.
Exactly.
And that is the reason why he's not going to entertain miracles.
So it's kind of repackaging Hume.
Exactly, repackaging Hume. I want to actually have more to add on David Hume, but we'll get there. Before that, there's one instance where you heard Justin ask Ehrman up front that no amount of evidence then would convince you of the miraculous. And he says that, unless physicists have to, show that or something. So it's a historical question. The question is whether, and I think in a very sarcastic manner, Bass also responds to that. So this is a historical question. Historians have to speak on this. And he's bringing physicists into the question. So I think it's a very flawed circular reasoning there, that you are not going to accept a miracle happened because miracles cannot happen. And why can't miracles happen? Because science cannot explain miracles. That is what is called methodological naturalism. And that's a methodological boundary or a methodological restriction that you have placed on yourself. Ashish, if you've watched Bart Ehrman's debate with William Craig, that's a very interesting debate, because I think Craig very intentionally takes a different approach in the debate. He brings the Bayesian calculus, right? He puts it in a mathematical form, the probability of the resurrection of Jesus given the background evidence that we have. And what Ehrman responds to that is saying that as a historian, I cannot entertain, I'm not quoting him verbatim here, but as a historian, I cannot entertain the resurrection because it does not allow within my methodological framework. And Craig responds saying that, well, the question of the debate today is not whether as a historian who subscribes to methodological naturalism, you can entertain resurrection, but the question is whether the historical evidence supports that the resurrection happened, right? So what do you think about methodological naturalism? Because that's exactly what this seems to be, is calling up physics into it.
Absolutely. See, if you're going to assume that this is never going to happen, then there's no point in a debate also. What Ehrman could do is he could bring up a rival explanation. That's what some of the I think late 19th century and even some of the 20th century historians speaking from that end did. But with Ehrman, I feel that he agrees to a lot of things that Bas is saying, and this is what happens. I mean, if you look at his work, he agrees to a lot of things that they are saying, but he even in debates I've not seen him putting up a counter rival explanation and then going and defending it, right?
Yeah.
That's not something that he's doing, and then he comes with this presupposition that this is never going to happen, and therefore I won't believe it, and it has never happened in 13.48 billion years ago. I mean, because it violates the laws of physics. It's a claim, right? Right there, it's a claim. He has not seen the history of the universe. I could counter argue that, okay, you give me a simulation, or you build a simulation. So I'll ask the physicists to build some simulation that could actually backtrack all these events, and let's see. Okay, then you're actually raising the bar of evidence that they also want us to do. But given the evidence, what is the best explanation that we have? And in fact, given the evidence, we do have enough evidence to believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, does it also, I think it also boils down to your philosophical pre-commitments, right?
That's what happens to the end when Ehrman says, apart from the Christian.
Exactly, I was coming to that.
I mean,
so his question is, I think we did not play that part, but maybe when we put this out, we can show that part as well.
Who outside of Christians think that Jesus was raised from the dead?
Pinchas Lapid. He was a Jewish historian and scholar. He wrote a book called The Resurrection of Jesus. You should read it. It's actually really good.
So Pinchas Lapid is an Israeli historian, and he just frowns at what is said. So, but then the question is, obviously Christians have a pre-commitment to the supernatural. Naturalists disregard, or they do not believe in the supernatural. And then the question or the argument is not a historical argument. You are coming with a preconception or a presupposition. This is also interesting, Ashish, because we did mention David Hume in the past, but David Hume was that one person who turned the tide in skepticism, right? That even modern skeptics in YouTube comments, they are still glorifying Hume.
Yep.
But Hume is outdated.
Absolutely.
Hume's views are outdated with the rise of Bayesian calculus. So Thomas Bayes was a theologian and a philosopher in the 17th century, a contemporary of Hume. And the first Bayes theorem was first used to actually show that miracles are possible. So what does the Bayes theorem do? In very simple sense, it is the probability of an event given some background evidence or background data that we have. Consider if I ask you that in 2017, right, if we are talking and I tell you that what is the probability of all of us wearing masks and walking out, or staying in quarantine, and most of us would have asked, what is quarantine? We would have checked the dictionary. We don't know we've not heard
probably
that.
Shashi Tharoor would have known. Apart from that, I don't think anybody in India would have known.
Exactly. So 13.8 billion years, or at least the entire history of human race, we have not read about something like this in the past, or I'm not aware of it. Would you say that that's not possible? That's not the best, maybe a historian studying this event about 100 or 200 or 300 years would then say that this is the best explanation, that there was COVID-19.
I'm not going to buy that.
I'm not going to buy that.
I'm going to go to the physicist and then ask them to give an evidence.
Exactly. So that's the flaw in the argument. So in a nutshell, we can. I think we can. I think we've conveyed what we wanted to convey
Absolutely,
in this
yeah.
video. Bart Ehrman is a brilliant historian, no doubt about that. But when
some of his works, we use it in apologetics, right? Especially Jesus mythicism and
Yeah,
stuff, which is
debunking.
quite popular. I don't know for what reason in India.
Jesus mythicism is popular, yeah.
We see.
Not
Thank
just
for,
in India, Ashish. I think mythicism is still popular among skeptics or
all
new
over the
atheists,
world.
New
True.
atheists, right? So, in a nutshell, what we just saw in this video is that here is a historian who, when asked about what is going to convince you, he, rather than saying that this historical evidence will convince me, he says, oh, I'm going to appeal outside of history to the domain of science, to physics, because that is his primary reason that he rejects the resurrection. It is not historical evidence. Remember that, and this is, as a Christian, right, this is something that is very encouraging at the end of the day, isn't it? That the historical evidence is not what leads him to deny the resurrection. Being a historian is appealing to, and he's appealing in a very wrong manner. It does not really ring sense to us. That's what we've explained. He's appealing outside the domains of history. But there's one more last point that I think we need to add here, Ashish. It is this, that miracles, if you read through history, I think it's Craig Keener who mentions...
I'm reading that work currently.
Yeah, in Miracles, he mentions that it's not just in the Bible. It's not just in the Gospels. You read Herodotus, you read Tacitus and all the ancient historians, you will see that miracles are recorded in all of their writings as well. So it's not a uniquely Christian literature, a phenomenon in Christian literature. Not just historically speaking. Here in India,
we have a lot of instances where certain miracles are claimed, and this not only in the Christian circles. I think, of course, then we'll have to discuss whether those miracles are really happening or not, but I think they are really happening, and the theology and the cause of those is a different story altogether. But we do have evidences, documented evidences, that miracles do happen, right?
Yeah, so the Eastern mind is not that skeptical
to miracles, I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think as I was reading through Keener's work, there's a point that he talks about the Western Christianity and how the church is growing in the East. Even in the church, you will see people in the West who are skeptical to, the miraculous, their miracles, and you could see scholars or even laymen who might not agree to all the miracles that happened in the Bible and stuff like that. But in the East, if you look at India and China, where the church is actually growing, the church grows because of miracles.
Yeah.
Because
we know
of
several instances.
We have heard directly. Some miracles we have seen directly. That's beside the point. But miracles still happen, and the resurrection of Jesus did indeed happen, and we do have enough historical evidences to back it up. Going to physicist and historian, a professional historian, a really reputable historian, saying that, I can't answer this question, I'll have to go to the physicist, is just lazy, I mean.
Exactly. So looking from the other side of the world, I would also say this, that, the Western mind, with all of what they've contributed to the world, there's something that you can also learn from the world outside the West. Miracles are still quite strongly documented and a sign of church's growth in areas where it is persecuted, like in India, here in India, and China and several other countries. With that, we would wind up this episode. If you find this interesting, this sort of conversation interesting, do let us know your feedback in the comments. This is Ashish and Asher for the Carpenter's Desk.